morning. It's good to see you too.
Yeah, we took a couple weeks off, but we're back. I am in Missouri right now on my Taking It to the Streets campaign. And boy, have I learned a lot.
Have you? Tell us about your trip. Tell us about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what you've learned.
Sure. Well, it's about this book, Always Erin, which is the story about my childhood trans identity and how it kind of got triggered and the resolution of it, and really challenging the narrative that's sort of promulgating in the media today. So I'm traveling around the country and donating copies to libraries and churches and therapy offices and hospitals and um, anybody who's really interested. So Partners for Ethical Care raised a bunch of money so that we could buy copies, and that's how we're able to do this. But the main thing that I've noticed when I'm talking to people is fear. They're really afraid to publicly in any way take a stand on this issue because they know that they're going to be harassed. Churches are afraid that they'll alienate people in their congregations. Therapists are afraid that they might lose their licenses. And libraries, I think, are oftentimes confused because this is a narrative that they've never heard before. But the fear, when when I initially start talking to people, I can just see there's sort of this like visceral response. And it takes a while before they're willing to really kind of confide in me. And so I'm trying to figure out how we can fight back against this when there is so much fear. And one of the reasons that we're meeting today to talk is that we had yet another instance of an organization or a business basically promoting this agenda. And do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, and there's a little bit of backstory to it as well. So before I got involved in activism, because this is not my wheelhouse, I'm not a born activist. I got involved with this when I started seeing what was happening in schools and happening to kids. Prior to that, I was a novelist and I had a little knit and crochet business. So I do knit and crochet designs. Ravelry is the online database, the primary biggest one for knit and crochet patterns. So when designers design them, we put them on Ravelry. They have a really great interface for people to find patterns and download them. And I used to sell my patterns there as well as some other places. Well, they've always celebrated Pride Month. The two owners, Jessica and used to be Casey. Casey has now, as of the last couple of years, decided that he's a she and he's Cassidy now, but they're a married couple. And they've always celebrated Pride. And in June, they, have the big Pride splash all over their pages. And I'll be honest, I was not entirely comfortable with that because some of the organizations to whom they donated, I was very uncomfortable with because I know that some of them, they purport to serve children, but what they're really doing is recruiting children. So full disclosure, during June, I would turn off my sales on Ravelry just because I didn't want my profits being donated to come to organizations I was so uncomfortable with.
Right.
Well, during the run up to the last election, there was a big explosion in the yarn world over something Ravelry did. They made an announcement that no patterns or comments or anything supportive of President Trump were allowed on Ravelry.
Interesting.
So you
Wow.
couldn't put any MAGA, any pro-Trump, anything, not even in the comments in the discussion box, nothing pro-Trump was allowed.
Wow.
They would allow anti-Trump stuff. That was fine.
Which
And
on some level, I guess, because they're a private business, they do get to make those kinds of decisions. But it does seem a little draconian to say, no positive comments whatsoever.
well, the problem with this, and I'll be fully honest, I didn't necessarily disagree with their politics. I didn't have a lot of good feelings about our past president. But what happened was they further divided people. They divided the community. I had a good friend who's a crochet designer, and she, no kidding, supported her family with her crochet business for a while when her husband went back to school. And people who were her customers started contacting her and wanting to know which side of the Ravelry debate she was on.
Oh,
And
and
she had worked very hard to keep politics out of her business. I don't even know what her politics are, and she's a good friend of mine. And she said, I keep that out of my business. Well, that wasn't good enough for people. No matter what she said, pro or con, she lost business. She lost company or lost, clients. So in a very real sense, what Ravelry did took food out of her kids' mouths
right,
because it forced people to get political.
right.
So I was
And
very
that's what's
unhappy
so
with that.
unfortunate with this whole, the movement that we're in right now, the identity politics. It just is further dividing people, and it's really frustrating. This is not a way to bring people together. This is not a way to promote, um, you know, positive feelings in our country, inclusion and diversity. I mean, one of the things that I keep thinking is that, when people talk about inclusion and diversity, they're talking about diversity of looks, not politics, not beliefs.
Mhm.
And there is definitely a push towards really marginalizing people who don't have the, quote unquote, appropriate political ideology.
Yeah. The right thing for Ravelry to have done with their Trump issue was to say, no Trump, nothing. We're
Mhm.
not going to have Trump patterns. We're not going to have Trump discussion. We're not having that at all. That would have been the appropriate thing to do if they really felt that this was problematic. But that's not what they did. And they stood by their decision and they called Trump supporters horrible names. So at that point, I stopped selling on Ravelry altogether. My patterns are still there. People can still find them, but they link to my website. They link to other pattern sale platforms like Etsy and Ribbler. But this month during Pride, they did something very different, very troubling. And I want to talk about that. And I almost hate to put this image up, but I feel like people need to see it.
Yeah.
So this month for Pride Month, they put this image of, I don't even know how to describe it. It's filled with BDSM images. There is a sex toy on the right side of the screen that I'm not even going to describe what that's for. If you don't know what that's for, please just enjoy your ignorance and your bliss. There's nothing in this image that has anything to do with yarn. This is all sex fetish, sex toys, porn. And this has been happening more and more, I think, ever since Casey decided to become Cassidy.
Mhm.
And I also took a screenshot of Cassidy's profile. And the profile is very troubling. I mean, right there on the right side, it says, I don't want to look cis. I don't want to be. Why do you need this on your business profile? I mean, your favorite cuss word. Why is that even part of a crochet and knit business? This
Yeah.
is just, they've lost the plot. And frankly, I am going to take my business, I'm going to delete my account. I haven't done it yet because some of my customers have said, oh, please give us time to download your patterns.
Mhm.
One of the things Ravelry does is it keeps a library of all the patterns that you've purchased.
Wow.
Once I delete my account, anyone who's purchased one
Mhm.
of my patterns will no longer have access to it. So I'm going to make an announcement and I'm going to give my customers some time to download.
Mhm.
But it's really troubling and disappointing. And I don't think a business can continue like this. I think they're spiraling downward.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that it's really important that people take a stand and start fighting against this. And it is hard because you lose business. As you mentioned, your friend potentially. There are people who are relying on this for for their livelihood. And yet more and more organizations are really forcing people to decide whether to support this ideology or not. And
Mhm,
again, it has all the hallmarks of a cult. You're
mhm,
either with us or you're evil. You
yeah,
either agree with us or you're bad.
mhm,
And again, that division is so unhealthy because there's nuance. And that's one of the things that I've found as I've traveled the country is, first of all, um, how many people are concerned about what's happening. I ran into a woman at a media outlet who was a lesbian, and she was so happy that I was doing this because she said the lesbian community is being decimated by this because every young lesbian is told that they're actually trans. And
mhm,
she said even her partner, who's a butch lesbian, is pressured into transitioning, as if there's something wrong almost with being lesbian. At this point, it's better to be like, you're more accepted if you're trans than if you're, gay or lesbian.
Right, which goes right against the origin of the Pride movement. The whole
Right.
purpose for the Pride movement was to make being homosexual acceptable, to
Right.
get it
So that
into
they weren't discriminated against, and there wasn't the kind of, I don't want to say exactly normalized, but acceptance, just to push acceptance, so that they weren't targeted and bullied. And now they're being targeted and bullied. It's like the very movement that was started to forward their rights and protections has turned against them and turned against everybody who doesn't agree with this. And again, it's heartbreaking to me that we have to make these very difficult choices like you're making to delete your account. But I do think that more and more we're going to have to do this, or else this ideology is just going to infect everybody and everything. And we've seen situations where ideologies like this have taken over, and people, it starts with them being marginalized, and then it starts with them being boycotted or picketed or bullied, and then it moves towards them being, maybe put in concentration camps, and then maybe we just kill them because we don't agree with them. And it's otherizing people who don't agree. It's suggesting that they're somehow less than human if they don't buy into your ideology.
And that's what Ravelry did around the Trump issue. They called Trump supporters bigots, racists, white supremacists, and labeling people like that is exactly what you're talking about. It's othering them, it's making them less than human. I mean, all of us who are in the gender-wise, gender-critical community, we get attacks and threats all the time, threats on our lives, because we have questions about this. And the trans and queer community really hitched their wagon to Pride, to the homosexual rights movement, and claimed, oh, we're just the same thing. We're the same thing as them. And we're seeing now, no, they're not. No, the bullied have become the bullies, and they're the biggest bullies on the playground.
Yep.
And we all need to stand up and say, we're not going to take this anymore.
Yeah, it's astonishing to me that we have men who claim to be women threatening to rape and torture and murder women, and that's acceptable. I mean, to me, that's just shocking. And the fact that you and I are targets of bullying and potentially violence because we are simply trying to stand up to protect children and women is very shocking. And we had another example of us being, publicly attacked on, a blogger's website. This particular blogger, we don't want to name him because we don't want to give him any attention, but he historically goes after anybody who he deems is other, who is unacceptable, who is, doesn't agree with his ideology, and just basically lies. I mean, it just makes up just absurd things about us. And people just accept it. And again, when something like that happens, just this morning I woke up to a couple of tweets, private messaging in my Twitter, basically saying things like, why are you trying to erase us? How come you hate us so much? And it really is misrepresenting our intentions, where we're coming from. We're not trying to erase anybody. We're just trying to protect children and women, especially vulnerable women's private spaces. We're not saying that men can't wear dresses or that women can't wear plaid and work boots. We're not trying to enforce rigid gender stereotypes, but it does kind of seem like they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And this, I know I keep going back to the false dichotomies, but this ideology is so full of the false dichotomies. If you don't give us everything we want and agree with everything we say, you hate us and you don't want us to exist. Exactly. That's a false dichotomy. There's so much in between those two extremes.
Right.
And it's so sad. And going back to this blogger, this is the second time this blogger has attacked me. And I just have to laugh. Another friend of mine, he targeted her a couple weeks ago, and she was so upset about a bunch of the lies that were in it. And I told her, I said, you know, an insult from an ignominious source is actually a compliment.
Right.
But one of the things I did want to address, because he said in his blog that you and I have published our books in order to make money off of this issue. And I want to reinforce, I want to tell people, you and I have not made a single penny off of either of our books. All of the profits from our books go straight to PEC in order to further our work to protect children from unethical medicalization. So
Exactly.
if
And
you're
we're donating books to libraries because we feel like this is so important. We're not making any money off this. The trip that I'm on is primarily self-funded. And granted, I am asking for donations to cover gas and housing and food. But I'm not making money off of this. This is, you know, I would make a lot more money if I stayed at home and put in hours for my regular job.
yeah,
So when people accuse us of this, it's just astonishing. And yet, people from the Human Rights Campaign are actually full-time paid employees pushing their ideology, and nobody's going after them.
yeah.
And that's kind of astonishing. We have Planned Parenthood, ACLU, people who are, even Lurie's Children's Hospital, they have full-time employees that are pushing this narrative into the communities, into the schools, you know, into the churches, into the libraries, into politics. And for some reason, that's okay. And so I do want to say, even if we were making money on these books, it should be okay. They're making tons of money. You know,
Yeah.
I Am Jazz. I don't think that all the profits from I Am Jazz went to some kind of nonprofit to, you know, help children. I don't think so.
You and I put a lot of time and effort into writing our books.
Mhm.
And I think it says a lot that we don't want to make any money off of it,
Exactly.
that we are not in this for ourselves. I defy somebody to explain to me how this is good for me
Right.
or my business or my life or my family. How is this good for us to be fighting this? I love the way our friend Alex, who couldn't be here today, she says it. She says, do you really think all of these women just woke up one day and decided to be raging bigots about this? No, we come from a variety of backgrounds. We come from a variety of ideologies,
Mhm.
and we all see a problem that this is causing for children and families and for women.
Right.
And we deserve to be listened to because our voices matter too.
Well, and that's the other thing that I think is really interesting is I've been attacked for my story, for
Mhm.
you know, publishing a children's book about my story. People have really gone after me for that. And I think it's so ironic that, you know, if you are transgender, you're allowed to tell your authentic lived experience, and it's brave and stunning and you're celebrated. But anybody who writes something that slightly, you know, challenges that is
Mhm.
vilified. Again, this has all the hallmarks of a cult. This is not a tolerant and accepting group that just wants to promote diversity. This is a group that is really, I believe, out of control. They
Mhm.
have a lot of money and they are really bullying people. And again, the fact that I talk to business owners and they're even nervous having me in there once they realize what I'm talking about because they don't want other customers to hear, even though they'll say, I agree with you. I just have to be really careful because they know they will be targeted.
Mhm.
Again, libraries might be concerned to even have the book on the shelf because we've seen with Abigail Schreier's book that bookstores that have carried it have been picketed. Libraries that have carried it have been targeted. Again, this is a group that's trying to control a narrative in a very aggressive and bullying way.
Yeah, and there's nothing in this that is healthy or good for children.
Right.
When, you know, up to 98% of kids who are trans identified before puberty, once they go through natural puberty, the vast majority of them align with their birth sex.
Mhm.
Even the World Professional Association of Transgender Health says that and affirms that. There is absolutely no basis, no rationality for transing kids, for medicalizing kids.
No, especially when we're, increasingly finding out about the horrible side effects of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, not to mention surgeries. So if anybody wants more information about that, I encourage you to come to our website, Partners for Ethical Care. Again, we're not making money on this. And the other thing that that this blogger said is that we're a for-profit, and in fact, we are a nonprofit. And I want to make that clear. We're a nonprofit. We're not being paid. Again, we are not doing this because it's fun. We're not doing this because, we're making money
We're
off it.
hateful, or because we're hateful.
We're hateful. We're doing this because we are protective of children, and it's our responsibility. Another thing that I have heard is mind your own business. And boy, can you imagine if the same thing were said about people who are fighting the Nazis? Just mind your own business,
I'm sure it was said. I'm sure anybody who spoke up in defense of the Jews was told, mind your own business, or you'll end up in the concentration camp.
Yeah, and so we really, as part of a society, as grown-ups, it's our responsibility to protect children. And I take that responsibility very seriously, because I had people in my life who protected me when I needed help, who supported me, and it's basically saved my life. I have no doubt that if those supportive people hadn't been there fighting for me, I wouldn't have made it. And so these kids deserve to have someone to stand up and say, you're not inherently flawed. You can get through this. We can support you through this. You don't have to become a lifelong medical patient and blame your body for something that is it's something we can work on. We have good therapeutic techniques that can help people accept themselves when they have these difficult feelings. So I'm so thankful for Partners for Ethical Care and all the work that they're doing. I wish that there was a day when every one of the members of Partners for Ethical Care could get on a meeting like this and talk about why they're involved. But so many of them can't, again, because they'll be targeted, and because they have situations where they're unable to speak out. And so we have to do it for them.
Yep, yep. Well, thank you, Erin, and I wish you the best on your book tour. I can't wait to hear more stories from the field, and we'll see you next time on PEC Talks.
Thanks, Maria.